Welcome back to the Mature Male Podcast. I'm your host, Wes, a psychotherapist helping men mature through timeless wisdom and practical guidance. Today's guest is Davy Lazar, an award-winning film director, spoken word poet, and facilitator with a passion for purpose-driven storytelling that explores vulnerability, resilience, and what it means to be human. That same ethos fuels his community work. In July 2025, Davy founded Yoga and Pints, a men's group in Waltham Forest, England, supported by local funding, where men come together to stretch, talk, and connect. Whether behind the camera or facilitating conversations, his work is dedicated to creating spaces for honesty, empathy, and lasting connection. You can learn more about his work at davylazarfilms.com. Davy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, man.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that was it's always weird, right? Kind of hearing about yourself and the career and stuff like that. It's always yeah, it just kind of, because I think, we're often kind of just so busy in our day to day, you don't stop to think what you've done and you've achieved. So it's always nice to kind of have that sort of summary of yourself. Yeah.
Good, man. Yeah, no, I agree. It can be a necessary speed bump to kind of stop, take it, and be like, oh, yeah, I have done a few things in my life. Well, cool, man. Well, let's start with the story of Yoga and Pints. So it's a men's group where people come together to obviously stretch. That's the yoga part, and talk and connect. What led you to create this space, and what have you discovered that men really need when they're given permission to kind of show up in this space?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the there's like several drivers of kind of what made me want to actually, sort of start this thing. I realized that the version of my masculinity that I kind of built for myself and that kind of been living my whole life, it just wasn't working for me, like, yeah, I needed a new masculinity, or like an updated version, almost like a new version of like iOS, right? Yeah, I needed to be more empathetic. I needed to reach different parts of myself. And so, yeah, like, I've been on quite a journey, my masculinity. And so, yeah, I've done a lot of work to kind of get myself to where I am now, to kind of essentially unlock my emotions. And I was really excited by the opportunity to sort of, help other men get to that space. I've been to lots of men's groups myself as well. And I just got so much, so much joy and connection. And I learned so much. It's so funny how kind of hearing someone else's issues and obstacles and someone else's journey, how that kind of, helps you make sense of your own journeys and your own issues, right? So for me, yeah, I wanted to create a space where men kind of got back into their bodies, had essentially, like some time to like pause, to kind of, reconnect with their bodies, with their minds, with their hearts, and with each other.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think it's so unique that, to your point, there are men's spaces, but to use an exercise modality like yoga, I think has a specifically effective way. I couldn't agree more. I think many men, including myself, are very out of touch with our bodies. And I think a lot of the conversations we have tend to be very cerebral and compartmentalized. And I imagine that having this opportunity to stretch your body, get in tune with it, may be a primer to help guys then emotionally go there. I don't think it's a coincidence that many men are physically and mentally rigid and
Yeah.
inflexible. But yeah, just curious your thoughts if you found that correlation, or how you feel like yoga has been a way that helps men open up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the guys, that have sort of been to our sessions, they all say that they arrive because, so essentially we do yoga and pints in the evening. And so, that's guys are coming straight from work, right? So they are coming with baggage, with stress. They are coming with, one guy described it as like a bee's nest, like, there was just bees buzzing around in his mind, and having that 25 minutes of yoga and then 5 minutes of meditation just separated him from his day, like physically, like it just created this sort of separation, and it allowed him to kind of just relax and ease into, almost like exhaling, into the discussion, which meant that, yeah, like, we've had tears, we've had, laughter, we've had a whole range of emotions that the men were able to access that they might not have been able to had they just kind of turned up from work and tried to get straight into, like talking about feelings. So yeah.
I think that's so powerful, man. And I have found that those exercises are kind of sneaky, because I think many men write it off as more feminine, wrongly so. And I'm just curious, have you gotten any pushback or some questioning about doing yoga before the pints, or have you found that across the board men tend to be open and down and it's been something that hasn't had a lot of resistance?
I think I mean, there's definitely the resistance, and I think maybe the people who really felt the resistance just haven't come, you know? I've had a lot of girlfriends, so like, again, quite a few of our guys have told me that it was their girlfriends that really kind of pushed them to, to sort of join, right? And then a lot of them, kind of also admitted that they thought they were just going to, sort of come for the pints and the chat and then just kind of get through and survive the sort of yoga bit, but actually what they came to find was like, they really enjoyed the yoga and the stretching and yeah, and just, how it sort of like gave them a proper pause and, yeah. And it just kind of like, yeah. So for me, I hope that answers the question.
I agree. I think we need this space more and more because the only way guys are going to normalize it and see that it's a very effective means to being fully masculine and expressing yourself is by having the opportunities to do it. So yeah, I'm thankful that you have that space. And along with that, historically, you're also a film director and you've created social impact films like Give a Book and How to Age Successfully, which tackle some pretty heavy themes around human connection and resilience. Curious what draws you specifically to these stories that mainstream media often overlooks, and how do you approach filming subjects that require, such a deep trust?
Yeah. So for my film Give a Book, we shot that for a charity called Prison Reading Groups. And as the name suggests, right, they run reading groups, in prisons. And actually, if you look at the prison population in the UK, 96% of the prison population are male. And I'm not at all trying to start some kind of gender war, say we need more women in prison, like that's obviously insane, right? If, but for me, like what it says is that, going to prison, ending up in prison is obviously a very male skewed issue. And, obviously if people commit crimes, then they should be punished, yada, 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 right? But the point is, yeah, I was really drawn to that film because essentially in that film, in Give a Book, it's about a man trying to connect with his daughter from prison. And, on the best of days, if you have a teenage daughter, it's going to be really hard to connect with her, much less when you're in prison. And then the way he does this is by sending her a book. And that's also what the charity does. It connects families and friends of prisoners on the outside with books, for reading. So it's really simple, but it's so beautiful and just touching. And so, yeah, for me, it was a sort of no brainer really to kind of tell this story. And what made it even better was our lead actor in the film is actually a pretty famous Hollywood actor. Not sure how sort of known he is in the States, but his name is Ralph Ineson. And he recently played Galactus in the latest Fantastic Four First Steps film. So he was the villain in that. So really great to have the support and the backing of an actor of his sort of caliber. And then also not to mention the fact that we shot with him on the Saturday, and on the Monday he was at the studio filming as Galactus. So he kind of gave us his final weekend off, So for me, yeah, it was an incredible film and just really nice to have, that sort of, like an actor of his ilk, and then just have an incredible team bring this story to our life.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you sharing that. And, I resonate with that appreciation for, especially in this men's space, or let's say men centric content or projects, that it is a small enough world where, more famous male figures are more accessible and open to wanting to help. And I think it really speaks to the larger desire for men to support each other. And, obviously that's such a gift that you got to have his skills given his stature. And, but more so the message of your project spoke loud enough or resonate enough with him to offer to do that. And I hope more and more men in those more prominent positions do take the time to find these projects they can support and be a part of, because I think they're vital. I think they're really important. And I think it provides like a level of credibility that otherwise wouldn't, right? I mean, obviously, if a guy watches your film and he sees that actor, like it shows the value for giving voice to some of these more local things. So that's a really cool story, man. And I'll have to go check out the film in support of that.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, and yeah, to sort of add on to what you're saying as well, actually, I think it's yeah, I think it's obviously, in the sort of climate that we're in now, right? I think there's a lot of high-powered men doing lots of bad things, right? And so it's a very difficult time for men to be like, hey, but we're also sort of struggling and we need help, right? So it's a very difficult time to say, hey, like, we want to uh, support and help and uplift men, when obviously a lot of this sort of narrative, and rightfully or wrongfully, there's a lot, like if you look at there's, I think recently in the past couple of months there's been two or maybe three CEOs who are all men who've been like fired for misconduct, right? There was the guy at the Coldplay, and I think the CEO at Nestle just got fired for again, misconduct. So like, it's what I'm saying is like, it's a tough time to be a man. And I think, like men in power who abuse that power, they don't help it for kind of like regular guys like us, who are sort of trying to figure out how to be better men. And so the sort of short story is that, like, I think it's kind of got to start from men. Like men need to help each other. You know what I mean? Like, if you're an ally, or if you're just a man who's sort of trying to be a more positive influence and force in the world, we have to help ourselves, because it's pretty tough to ask, women or whoever, right? It's pretty tough to ask other marginalized groups to help men. So I think it kind of has to start from us. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's interesting because if you would tie back the origins and issues of these men who are incarcerated and these CEOs, ironically, and many times it's the same thing. They don't have a healthy male role model in their life
Mhm.
to show them the ropes. There's not a level of healthy accountability and challenge, really, though, support and love. And while the paths ended up very different, in some ways, they're equally as bad in their own right, which is essentially these men are not becoming healthy, mature men. And I agree, man. I think that the extremes are never a good reflection, whether it is the incarcerated population or CEOs, but nonetheless, it is a reflection. And I think for the majority of us who are in the middle of those two groups, like we're not super successful and power hungry and not held accountable. And
Mhm.
we also, aren't behind bars and haven't committed crimes. There's lessons to learn to essentially say, like, where did we as men go wrong? And how can we get ourselves not just back on track, but start to set a new standard for what it means to be a man and to normalize talking about issues? Because I think in both these cases, another big theme, right, is like nothing just starts in this blown up huge crime or affair or, ordeal. It always starts in these smaller thoughts or behavioral patterns that aren't put in check or shared, like, hey man, I'm struggling with this, or this is what's going on. And as simple as it sounds, I think it's just us creating the spaces like you are with Yoga and Pints, and me and my work as a therapist, of like, you got to feel secure and safe enough to share these things, not to scare you that you're going to end up in these paths. But surely we're naive to think that being isolated, not opening up and not growing with other men won't increase our risk to lead to paths like that.
So true. So true.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you, because you're a filmmaker, obviously you have a large creative component to your life. And something, I am curious about is I have found that there's not a lot of the average man wouldn't call himself creative. And maybe I need some data to back that up. But I'm curious your experience growing up, because I would put myself in that category too. I feel like my way I engaged in my own masculinity was different because I had more of a creative bent, but I often felt pressured to fit into some of these more like jock like or like stoic like categories. But it's cool as an adult, you kind of feel more freedom to be artistic and creative and not feel like judged. But at the same time, there's still, with my friends who wouldn't call themselves creative, there's this lack of understanding where they're kind of like, I don't really get you, man. Like you're kind of this, you see, you're talking about beauty and presence and, I don't know, all these like different terms. And yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts on how that experience has been like unlocking your creative path and and what you may speak to guys who are thinking like, is creativity for me? Like, how do I be creative, kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I knew that I wanted to make films since I was about 14. So, it's always been very, very clear in my mind that I want to make films. In terms of sort of my creativity, again, yeah, like I've always sort of been as a writer, storyteller. So my dad is a music producer. So there was just always beats lying around. So, I started writing raps, and I've got like a few rap songs that I've sold, like a few copies of and stuff. This is teenage me, so please don't go and listen to it. It's terrible. But so like I've always just kind of had this need to express myself. So yeah, I never really felt any kind of friction because obviously being a rapper is kind of cool and quite masculine, right? So I thought, let me rap. But then at a certain point, I did start to write spoken word poetry. And obviously that's obviously much more introspective, much, much deeper, right? Much more vulnerable. But again, I never really felt much pushback. I think it's all about finding your like tribes. So, I found my tribe of poets when I was in a different city in the UK. And then when I moved to London, it's kind of a mecca for poetry. So again, you just sort of find your tribes. So yeah, I never really felt too much friction. It was more so that because I was always good at school, my family, when they heard that I wanted to make films, they said, well, why not go be a doctor or an accountant or, like one of those safe jobs, right? Which are sort of, funny enough, a lot of those jobs are being replaced by AI now. But anyway, but so it was more that kind of like, why not be, you know, why not go do a more sort of higher earning, well paid job? But I just always had this urge to say something in an interesting and creative way.
Yeah. And I think that last point spot on. I think there's many of us men who feel stuck in a corporate job or feel the need to, yeah, as you say, work a job that is more safe. And I think you are a living testimony on how, while that's understandable because that's just the way our parents' generation tends to think, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily authentic to us. And I think the fact that you have not only done projects, but now like you're living in those roles that provide like are livable. I think it kind of breaks this narrative, right? That like everyone is a starving artist and it's just a matter of time before you fail and then like tap out and then have to go put on a suit and tie and work corporate. I think we live in a world that is creating more spaces for people to have creative jobs as you're doing in a way that feels, yeah, authentic to you. And you don't have to like necessarily say, even though this thing is in my heart to start, well, it's fine. I'll just get behind the computer and look at Excel sheets all day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So true.
Cool. Earlier you mentioned that you experienced this shift in your masculinity of, I don't know if you would call it preconceived notions or conditioning of what you felt like it meant to be a man. And yet then the shift kind of opened you up to exploring and living out this new way of what it means to be a man. I'm curious, how would you define yourself in that old version? If you want to use different language, but for now, like old version of masculinity of Davi. And then after that shift, maybe what led to it, and then how you would describe that, version 2.0 now.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, the best way to describe what my old masculinity was, I mean, it's pretty rough, man. I mean, I would go like months without ever calling my mum or my family or friends, really. Like I kind of didn't really have very many friends. I went through the worst, most horrendous breakup of my entire life. And when I think back to it now, like, it really kind of messed me up because there was infidelity and it was just a train wreck, right? And again, I didn't talk to anyone about it. Like I never kind of, like just shared it with a friend and kind of got support for it. I just kind of like went through these, kind of like car crash after car crash. And I just sort of quietly held it down. That's my best way to describe what sort of, my old version of masculinity was. And, I was very angry, you know what I mean? If you ask my wife, even within the last sort of 6 years, when she first met me, my wife will tell you I was an angry man. I just could not manage my emotions because I never allowed them to sort of pass through me. I never kind of gave them much thought, you know what I mean? And like I said, this is literally in the span of 6 years that my wife will tell you that I am a much less angry man now because I'm able to sort of process my emotion, process feelings of hurt, of rejection, of anger, right? And I guess, which leads us to sort of what Davy 2.0 is, which is, yeah, a man that kind of allows himself to access the full sort of spectrum of his emotions much more. I'm much more patient as well. I think because I kind of built myself as this tough, hard guy, just like, what I mean? Crying and complaining was for sort of, weak people. I think now Davy 2.0 has a lot more empathy for other people who are struggling, even other people who, like if someone's rude to me, if there's someone who I'm finding is being a bit difficult, I think I'm able to kind of identify that this person's just probably having a bad day or is going through an issue of their own, right? I think, when you learn to have empathy and kind of just love for yourself, I think it's so much easier to kind of have that for other people, even if those people are kind of not even necessarily being nice or kind to you, like I'm able to sort of, yeah, give, give everyone space. I'm able to sort of just see people and kind of meet them wherever they are without judgment.
Yeah, it's such a powerful transition and such a beautiful story arc that you've walked us through. I appreciate that. And I resonate with a lot of the anger piece and just suppressing emotions. And I use this analogy: if you're in a pool and you have a floaty and you really try to like push it down, it's going to pop up. And that's a lot of male anger that we sporadically and really uncontrollably tend to express the anger. But when you try to like push down just enough on the floaty to get up, it's always awkward, like eating spaghetti. But it really creates a sense of control over your emotions, but without suppressing them or pushing them down. I'm curious, you mentioned that you started managing those emotions. What were some frameworks or skills, resources that you tapped into besides your wife's feedback, which I can relate to as well? I feel like I'm always apologizing here. I go, I'm the one flying off the handle or being harsh or whatever. So for those listening out there, wife's best feedback, though an expensive one. But yeah, just curious, any frameworks, practices, resources that you learned about that a guy could likewise start tapping into to learn to control his anger and express it healthily.
I mean, I think for me it was therapy, was really big. And it's obviously, like I know we're in very much in a very big sort of therapy culture now, but if you can't, don't have the time or the money or some resources to sort of do the therapy, I think, yeah, you just need kind of one or two, probably minimum two, just so you don't kind of burden that person. But for me, it was like, well, she was my girlfriend at the time, but my then girlfriend and my sister, who were my sort of two, just, people that I sort of shared stuff with, right? I think you have to have, yeah, I think you absolutely just need a sounding board, someone that isn't in your head to, to sort of like, to help you kind of manage and make sense of the sort of how, of your sort of jumble emotions. And then, so yes, I'd say therapy, someone to talk to. And then I think it's practice, I think you have to really practice it, So I'll give you one really good example. It's kind of a longish story that I'm going to try and condense, but essentially, yeah, when I was in therapy, it was therapy for childhood trauma that, we can maybe go into at this time, but just, really, really horrific childhood trauma. And I was trying to sort of deal with this, right? I was trying to sort of face this thing. And my housemate at the time, his girlfriend was, always over and, and they were sort of just, like kind of quite noisy because they were actors. And so they'd be up at night kind of just doing actor weird stuff. And yeah, while I'm sort of trying to, literally go through this childhood trauma because like I kind of kept running away from it. One night, it was the sort of last straw, they're super loud. I can't sleep. And then I just snap. I completely snap. I start smashing up the flat. I'm breaking things, punching walls to the point where, my housemate and his girlfriend are so terrified that they jump out of his bedroom window to like escape the flat and escape me because I'm just a raging madman, breaking up, smashing things in the living room. And then, I was kind of like saying stuff and like shouting stuff as well. And I said some really mean things about his girlfriend. Anyway, fast forward when we eventually kind of all get together and sit down, I obviously apologize for smashing the flat and for scaring them. And, but then his girlfriend wanted one more apology, which was, for me to like, apologize for the incredibly like hurtful thing I said about her. That I found out that was one of the most difficult things I've had to do in my entire life, because I'm like, you guys were the ones that kept me up. You guys were the ones that, were being rude to me. And I'm having to, like, I kind of saw myself as the sort of, as the sort of victim here. Right. And it really, it took a lot of just energy. It took a lot from me to kind of give it that apology with no buts, with no, just say, I'm sorry for this hurtful thing that I said to you. When you think that, when you kind of see yourself as victim, and, and you kind of, I think a lot of anger comes from a sense of like injustice that the world and society is against me, And so for me, yeah, like a really, that moment, me having to put, even though, like I said, I'm in therapy, I've had childhood trauma, I am trying to address it, I'm trying to deal with it. And these people are kind of just being quite rude and keeping me up. Even like, despite any wrongdoing, any sort of blame on their part, I had to swallow all of my sort of pain and just be like, what is the right thing to do here? What is the right thing to do here? The right thing to do is to apologize with no caveats, with no buts. No, I'm sorry, but you kept me up. Like, no, I'm sorry for the hurtful thing I said about you. And, that, because one of the hardest things I've had to do in my entire life was to put all my trauma to the back seat and just be like, like, I was an asshole, and it's never right to be an asshole. There's never an excuse or justification to say something mean or do something mean. As soon as you start justifying anger, justifying rage, you've already lost. You know what I mean? And so for me, the best thing to do is always to communicate and be vulnerable and be honest. You know what I mean? Like, anger and rage is never how you sort of deal with something. So I think, yeah, like, it's about kind of knowing that obviously anger is a part of you and it's normal emotion. But if you just kind of like torpedo or just kind of fire that at another human being, that's on you, not on them. So yeah.
And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, just really powerful story, and one that's super real and I think relatable to a lot of us men. I work as a trauma informed therapist, and one thing, and I've had pretty intense trauma as well in my life. And, one thing I have noticed, and you're getting at so many good points here, but I'll start with this one, is that trauma tends to rob the individual of the ability to have a say in what happened. Because if they had a say, then it wouldn't have happened. And so there's this immediate felt sense of loss of autonomy or control when the trauma is happening. And your body freezes, it internalizes it, and essentially says, you have no worth, you have no power, you have no choice. And the unresolved trauma will always come out as an overreaction to regain that autonomy, power, and choice, but out of the unhealed reactive manner, which is essentially what you tried to do, right? Instead of naming understandably your frustration, which like anyone would get pissed off at, like roommates who are inconsiderate, you can't sleep. I mean, that's a major thing. But in that moment, it's the unhealed part of you that manifests itself to say, it's not just that I'm expressing the anger, which shows the value of what I care about. Hey, I feel like you're being inconsiderate. Can you please keep it quiet? Like, this is what I need. It comes out in that overreaction and desire to say, well, like, you breaking things, smashing things is less like, oh, you're just this terrible person that's violent. And it's more of like, hey, I'm really hurt. I feel out of control. And that's going to be manifested in, how I'm expressing myself here. And we see that we talk about CEOs and famous people, using the anger in a really unhealthy way that dominates. But anger at its best actually creates protection and safety. It should lead you to this sense of knowing what you value, expressing it in an effective way, and then helping other people feel safe. I forget that movie with Liam Neeson where his like daughter gets kidnapped. It's an older one.
Yeah, yeah.
Taken, right? Like, thank God he got angry, because that fueled him to protect and, regain the safety of his daughter. And on a much lighter, less intense level, we have that same choice. So that's the first thing I would say in regards to that. The second, you mentioned about apologizing. I think that's huge, man. Like, I also struggle with apologizing, because you said it so well that the victim mindset feels like it's entitled to only being seen for how you're negatively affected, not seeing others and how you negatively affected them. And I do think many of us walk around, and this comes out, I'm in America, with like road rage, like so many men feel entitled. He cut me off, asshole. It's like, buddy, he's not even thinking about you, but that's just a classic example. Or getting in a bar fight, over silly, like a soccer game or
Yeah.
our football game
Yeah, I
that
watch
we would
football.
watch.
Yeah, I watch
Yeah,
NFL.
exactly. But man, I just think that's so true. And you use the perfect word for it. It's energy, man. It like takes so much energy,
Yeah.
because the energy takes a focus, and the focus takes a vulnerability and a presence to say, instead of me projecting and playing the script, she's in the wrong. How could she? I'm the victim. It took really consciously setting that aside to radically be present and say, okay, if I'm like operating out of like an empathetic present place, how can I understand my impact on this person? Apology is less about just like this external, okay, we're good, right? We're good. And it's more of an active acknowledgement of where something was made wrong in a way that builds trust to make it right. And it repairs the relationship, even with someone you're not that close to, in a way that requires a ton of energy. But I mean, I imagine it seems like while that was one of the hardest things you did, that was a testimony and true turning point, I think, for you in starting to mature and live out of that place more and more.
Massively, massively, right? Like I said, it was, not in a sort of like bragging way, but I was very proud of myself that I was able to kind of give the apology again, with no caveats, with no buts, right? Just a pure apology. And I really meant it, because I feel like, yeah, you have to sort of, the right thing is the right thing. You know what I mean? And I know that that sounds quite, like kind of almost silly and reductive. But the right thing is I hurt her and I have to make it right. You know what I mean? And regardless of any claim or that I have to also be in hurt, like it doesn't matter. I actively did a thing. I said words that this person, you know, felt kind of harmed by, and I had to make it right. So, I think, yeah, I feel like it's especially in our sort of society today where there's a lot of sort of and I kind of conversely, I think therapy culture, I think can also be sort of weaponized. I think it can be weaponized. A lot of the sort of language, a lot of it can be about the self, right? It's like, well, I was triggered. I was this, I was that. That's why I said these words. You know what I mean? So I think, yeah, I think a lot of sort of, I've seen it personally. A lot of people kind of weaponize therapy culture to almost sort of fuel their like narcissism, right? To like avoid apologizing in a situation like that. Because again, it's like and this victim, and they have this whole language, they have this whole suite of words and language they can use to kind of describe how they were the victim. And yeah, I think, I sort of try to always sort of lean towards, what's the word I'm looking for here? Towards doing the right thing.
I'm so glad you said that. I couldn't agree more. I'm not on social media, but I'm always, of course, thank you, man. But like I am always in sessions given new terms and reels about people ranting online about, yeah, exactly what you're saying. It's this, yeah, covert narcissism that really shows up and saying like, well, look how wrong everyone else is. And I can't believe they would do that. And I'm entitled to being treated the right way. And at the core, I think, yes, I would agree that every person deserves a genuine sense of care and love and acceptance. But I would call acceptance different than enablement. And if someone's essentially throwing an adult tantrum about how it's everyone else's fault, like I, to your point, I don't think we should enable that. And a really common example I use for people. So my trauma had to do with a parent. I don't know if yours did, but it's very common in our generation to blame our parents or older people for like everything or the majority of how we grew up. Like, I can't believe they would do that. And they're just so shut off. And, because they did this, then it led to this. And that actually may be true. There certainly may be some accountability. But now I'm a parent, and it's the classic, like, I'm seeing like, damn, this is hard. Like, it's not perfect. I'm constantly like learning how to love my son better. And something I often ask, the person that has the issue with the parent is, fair enough. but you are not them. So let's look at your capacity and where do you feel like you responded wrongly or you could have responded better, interpreted that better. Okay, that person hurt you. Well, have you called them? Have you
Yeah.
told them that they hurt you? Have you expressed a desire to be closer to them? Have you tried to understand where they were coming from in this? And I think to your point about apologizing, another thing we don't do well is out of that ownership, seeing where we could initiate more. I mean, to live in a world now where you can just ghost anyone, you can just say, well, it's their fault, like, screw them, I'm not going to be in their life, and you can just cut them off. I think the issue is that it's separated us as well as the ability to be accountable to ourselves and our relationship with that person. And whether or not we want that relationship to be close or that relationship was close, it's still a relationship. We have a connection to it that requires some sort of active decision making. And I think to your point on people ranting using therapy, we have to take a good hard look in the mirror and say, if I have problems in my life, surely they're at least partially because of me. I can't look and say it was literally everyone else that is the problem. So at least knowing I have a part, what would it look like to own up to that? And there's a psychologist I like that talks about this framework that when you have a full victim mindset, the issue with that is what you can't get better because it's always in someone else's hands. The power ability to change is always in someone else's hands. So it's completely disempowered and essentially you're stuck where you're at. And then all you can do is double down on feeling entitled to stay where you're at. If you own up to that victim mindset where you missed the mark, being responsible, it's super painful. It takes a hell of a lot of energy. But when you do, what's underneath that is essentially this empowered freedom to say, well, if I made it wrong, I can make it right. Just as much as I got myself here, I can get myself out. And I think many of us men need to know that of like the victim mindset, as good as it feels, is keeping you stuck. And just like you, it allowed you to move forward in those relationships. So yeah, thank you for naming that.
No, absolutely. And actually I've got two really, really powerful and examples of again kind of that relate to me and kind of trying to fight against because I think the thing with the victim mindset is it feels so good, right? It feels it's like a warm blanket. It's so comforting to know that it's not my fault why I didn't get the promotion at work. It's because of X amount of it's because of this ism, right? And so my two examples of that are actually to do with race. So yeah, obviously I'm a black man. I'm living in the UK, which is a predominantly white country. So a thing that I kind of through obviously talking with my black friends or black peers, I've heard a lot of black people say, oh, I don't want like I'm really tired of like white people coming up to me and like like asking me how to be like an ally, how to be anti-racist. And I'm like, well, where else do you want them to go? You know what I mean? And obviously, I'm sure we're both aware of the history, of what's happened, with the transatlantic slavery, and Europeans and the Americans, whoever, right? So, but it's like, yeah, it's this idea that, because I'm black and my ancestors and myself to today, I'm a victim of my race. I therefore don't need to have any part in kind of like teaching or helping white people, even if it's to like help them help us, even if it's to help you help me. It's like, well, I don't need to have any part in it. Why should I have to kind of extend myself? Why should I have to have uncomfortable sort of conversations? It's like, well, because it's a relationship and every relationship is a give and
Mm,
take. Every relationship has
mm.
two sides or multiple sides, whatever. But every relationship is about kind of, people or people's, kind of being like, you know what, we want this relationship to work. And because we both want it to work, we're both going to give something of ourselves. We're both going to be vulnerable. We're both going to give our time and our effort. This idea that because I'm black, I should give no effort in kind of help white people, who want to become allies, who want to understand our culture and our history more. I think it's nonsense.
I appreciate you naming that, man. And likewise, I think as a white person, we can also feel entitled to think, well, like that wasn't me. Like I didn't contribute to that. Like I didn't, if I was them, I wouldn't have done that, back then. And it's a sense of like, Yeah, but you have to have an empathy and compassion to understand like that person's not you. And you need to do the due diligence of understanding someone else. And if something is so obviously wrong, an entire culture or generation society is naming that, then at a minimum, you need to educate yourself on why it may be wrong. And at a maximum, to your point, you should find a way to be in relationship with a human that's connected to that societal relationship or experience that has happened. And I couldn't agree more, man. I think the ability to own up to things and work together is not just the start, but it's the way any relationship continues to go. But I think we're scared to be vulnerable. I think we're also scared to feel let down, or that like if we risk like being wrong or missing the mark, then that person's going to see me a certain way, where I'm going to be judged, where now people will think this certain thing. And I think at the end of the day, you have to really key in on like the individual, whoever's in front of you, get to know them and their story and just say like, you're a unique person. Yes, I understand these larger like narratives, experiences, history certainly affect you, but like, who are you? Like, what's your sense of this? And through that trustworthy dialogue is where you find the responsibility, the ownership, the hurts, the pains. The wounds are not healed on a grand level. Yes, the systems are broken, but they're healed through the relationships. I mean,
I
that's
love
really
that.
where it's at.
Yeah, man. That is, yeah, that's really well said. And if we've got time, but the second sort of bit of accountability that again I had to sort of really fight with was I was at a job at an advertising agency, and I actually started before my colleague who was a white man, and he really, and I kind of saw that he was moving up the ranks quicker, and getting the promotions and getting all of the sort of the big sexy jobs. And I started to look around and kind of, again, that sort of victim mindset of, is it because I'm black? Right. That's kind of where my mind went. And, I think for me, again, it's like, that was my initial thought. And it kind of made me feel, again, it made me feel good. It made me feel kind of like, well, like, like I am incredible at my job. And the reason I'm not moving up is because I'm black and there's racism. And I'm not saying that that was completely not the case. I'm not saying that my race had no issue, no sort of place there. But actually, when I kind of just took a step back and stopped kind of playing this sort of victim mindset, I actually kind of had to be really, really honest with myself. And I said that, you know what, actually, I think this guy outworks me. I think he shows more dedication. I think he shows more maturity, and to come back again, he outworks me. Like it was, but when I really just sort of looked at it objectively, I was like, this guy just works harder than me, and he kind of gives more to the company than I did. And, again, so to kind of round that out, even if, let's say, it was like 5% or 10% because of my race and 90% because he outworked me having not kind of just fallen back on the comfort of I'm a victim because I'm black, I realized, you know what? I got to fucking work harder. I got to do more. So even if it was 10% because of racism, let's say, either way, I became better. I evolved out of that situation because I was like, I need to work harder. And that's what I did. I started working my ass off, started giving more. And then I eventually started to move up, and I like directed a TV commercial at that company, and I started to do bigger things. You know what I mean? And so I think, yeah, just to get to sort of tie it back to this victim mindset of again, like, and to your point, like it keeps you stuck. It keeps you stuck where you are. And I could have been stuck there, not really getting any better at my job, thinking I'm a victim. And one day I'll go to another company where I won't be a victim, and I'll move up, But actually, like I kind of looked at myself. I took accountability, and I started working my ass off, So yeah.
Yeah, again, I appreciate you naming that story, especially related to work, because I think many of us men see ourselves in competition with others instead of ourselves. And we love to compare and, yeah, again, make it everyone else's fault. But I think to your point, if we look and really take responsibility for things, then one of two things happen. Either our initial judgments were wrong and we realize the power lied in taking the responsibility and that it showed itself, Or worst case, unfortunately, you could work your ass off and not get promoted and then verify that your initial judgment was right, but it was after you decided to not believe it at first, put it to the test, and let that be a secondary issue. Either way, the point is that you arrived to the truth, and the truth set you free in a way where it allowed you to move up. And not for anything else outside of the promotion, it allowed you to set a new standard for what does it mean to work hard, and what does it mean to commit myself to maturity, all these things. I often think that I certainly have still some envy, jealousy of certain men, especially now in like the male space. And it's such a gift because I get to stop and reflect, be like, well, what do you want in them that you're ignoring within yourself that you need to really find and like commit to doing? And instead of putting all this energy towards like them, be like, cool, thanks for that reflection. And now how can I hone in on this? But I think it's the stories we tell ourselves. And this last question has to do with the stories. So your background spans from the spoken word, poetry, filmmaking, community building, all forms of the storytelling. I'm curious if you can tell us how these different creative mediums have served a deeper work of helping people and men connect to their own stories.
Yeah, I think, so oftentimes, like when you go to like, I don't know, say you've gone to some sort of a panel, some sort of a talk, right, about a subject. I always find when they sort of talk about like stats or numbers or, when it's kind of like just them giving this sort of like pre-written speech. I always find I don't get much out of that, right? It's all sort of stuff that's quite kind of esoteric. You know, it's kind of hard to grab hold of. But whenever someone gives you a powerful anecdote, of like a moment or a thing that happened to them, something that just, like it's a story, right? You know what I mean? There's something about story that just, it just sticks. It just latches on to you. And it's just so incredibly powerful and like life changing. I've seen so many films that have just completely changed my life. That completely changed the way I think and feel about things. I think stories are, it's an ancient art form, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but yeah, I feel like, um, yeah, I don't know, I feel things really, really deeply. I feel things really intensely, and the only way I know how to sort of communicate that is through stories. So whether that's a poem, whether that's a film, and whether that's, a story. Yeah, I just feel all these things and I want to have other people feel them as well. So yeah, that's sort of why I do what I do. That's why I make art, because I think, there's nothing more amazing than feeling, which sounds kind of a bit, you know, but, but yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, man. No, I couldn't agree more. And I know where you were going there with it sounds a bit. But I think that's the point is to combat that narrative, man. I think that we know biologically that it's not that women are more emotional than men. And in fact, in younger years, boys tend to be more sensitive than girls. And that is not a negative or ostracizing trait. It's a naturally masculine trait that we need to tap into. And that's what I appreciate about you in your work is that you're not just saying like I have feelings. It's like you're being generous and responsible and caring with those feelings and in a way that articulates stories and messages that we need to know as men, like your work allows men to see themselves and what it means to be a man different. And I think that's so important. So for any guys out there listening, like you have feelings, like feel them, but after you feel them, like do something with them that's not, in both of our cases, lashing out of anger, but be generous with it. Like do something that feels like it's good for the world that represents the stories. Because while we each have individual stories that are so important, and by the way, I just love how you weaved in naturally so much storytelling in this show today. There's a greater story of manhood that we are all writing together as men that we really need to put pen to paper and say like, what are my words? What's my script? What am I going to share with the world? And what can I read and understand that other men may be going through in a way that feels like, we're all kind of reading the same book.
I love that. Incredibly well said. Incredibly well said, Wes.
Thank you,
So
brother. Well, I appreciate your time today, and we'll make sure to put your website, the films, some of those resources you told us in the show notes. And guys, until next time.
awesome stuff. Thanks, guys. Peace out. Appreciate that.